Well,
Okay.
we're in it, bro. Thank you
All right.
so much. Okay, so I've gotten this sense from two movies and from the last time I was in Japan in February that Japan is healing. It feels like it's healing as like a culture, which again is a very broad statement
Mm.
to make on a place I haven't spent that much time. But when I was there, I saw so many babies. Which like last time I was there before, it was like felt like there's zero children. And there's always this narrative going around about the aging population of Japan, blah, 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 blah.
Mm.
That combined with watching Godzilla -1, where it felt like people were taking control of their own narrative again. It was like, hey, we're not going to talk about this government that kind of fucked us a lot in the past. We're actually going to bend the rules a little bit, which I feel like is also rare in Japanese culture at large, and save ourselves. And to have like that combined with Godzilla -1 and The Boy and the Heron, they both were the top 2 of 3 books or of movies
Mm.
exported into the US, like when they came out. Like they crushed the box offices. Is that just a completely crazy thing to say, or do you
Mm.
feel like there's a cultural shift going on in Japan right now where it
Well,
actually is getting better?
here is my, my hope. I remember, I've been in Japan since 1988. I can remember in about 2008, the Japanese population was so sick of the ruling party, the Liberal Democratic Party, that they elected a new political party, which was the Democratic Party of Japan. Please have your beer search. Come by.
Kampai.
Come by. I'm having coffee. I'm tempted to put some Baileys in here, but then it may become an incoherent interview. Mm. So there was a political revolution. And for, the Democratic Party of Japan was kind of incompetent in some ways because this is the first time there had ever been another political party ruling Japan since 1950s. But they opened up the press, they opened press conferences to all the reporters, the weekly magazines. They tried to institute reforms that would promote women in business and strengthen equality, better childcare services. They did all these things that were really progressive. And if the nuclear accident hadn't come up, which is in Tokyo, talked about in Tokyo Noir, I think we would have seen a very different Japan. I think Japan would be doing much better. But unfortunately, it's kind of like hot potato. When you get caught holding the bag, everything gets blamed on you. But right now, I see the LDP, the Liberal Democratic Party of Japan, which people joke is neither liberal nor democratic, losing in election after election. And it looks like people are so fed up with a stagnant economy, increasing wealth inequality, jobs, and no real positive change that maybe Japan is on the verge of change. I mean, even making Tokyo Vice, which was interesting in that people were willing to bend the rules, let us shoot in places they hadn't done before. And so I think in many ways, though, it seems like a hopeless time for Japan with the yen, like, it's the land of the rising sun and the sinking yen.
Yeah.
All that is going well on. I think people are so fed up that there is possibility of change, of people of trying to take control of their lives and the government, which would be nice.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the optimistic version of things. I have seen hopes materialize before, resulting in real change here. And even though it only lasted about 3 years, it could happen again.
For sure. I do think there's a little bit of a economic tailwind for that as well, with Hong Kong falling, kind of falling as the economic center of the East, and
Yeah,
kind of
well,
looking for a new place for financial investments.
well, this is what happens when you let the Chinese Communist Party decide that they're going to have an influence on how government works. So yeah, Hong Kong has collapsed as a financial center. England screwed themselves with Brexit. That was not brilliant. Singapore is still strong in the sense of being the Switzerland of Asia, where anything goes as long as you don't do it in Singapore.
Yeah.
But Tokyo has the potential, with people who are smart, of becoming a Asian financial center.
Yeah. Thought it out. Would you mind letting the audience know who you are?
Oh, I am Jake Adelstein. I am an investigative journalist who has been working here since 1993. I am the author of 4 books, 3 of which are in English: Tokyo Vice, The Last Yakuza, I sold my soul for Bitcoins, which will be out under a new title in 2025, hopefully.
Amazing.
And my latest book, Tokyo Noir, just came out on May 14th in Australia. Not going to be in US bookstores until October 1st. I don't even know how that works. That's the world we live in now. I
Available on
think
Kindle though. I got it.
were you
Yeah.
able to download it on Kindle?
Yeah.
Amazon
Yeah. Yeah.
did it
Yeah. I'm like
so bad,
20% through. Yeah. Yeah.
so badly that you had to like go to the Kindle store and find it there. And the nice thing about it is, I mean, I'm glad that we're talking about this while it's still relevant. I don't know when this is going to air. The nice thing is Amazon screwed up things so badly that all the good reviews for Tokyo Vice I inherited for Tokyo Noir. So even though it's only come out on May 14th, it has 2,500 plus reviews at 4.4 stars. I'm like, great, thanks Amazon.
Let's go. That works out. That's awesome. It's funny because, as I've kind of been studying you and preparing for the podcast, I feel like every time I listen to you on somebody else's podcast or something, I learn something new that you've done. Because you also have a podcast as
Oh
well.
yes, we did one podcast called The Evaporated, which was about missing people in Japan. I did that with Shoko Plombeck and her sister Amy Plombeck and Tisanka Siripala, who's another journalist here, which was tremendous fun, in which we tried to find my accountant who vanished in 2017 or 2018 with all my records after I paid him in advance. And it was a wonderful exploration of missing people in Japan. I told you I just got back from the United States because I'm working on a new podcast with the same crew about a series of mysterious deaths, probably all committed by one nurse in 1992 at the hospital where my father works and still works at 87. So
Wild.
yeah, it's such a crazy story because it's possible this nurse killed 70 plus people, but never went to jail. He's only been convicted. He's only been found guilty in civil court. And oh wow, it's a crazy story. Arrested once, indicted, and set free.
That's insane. It's so scary. It's so scary. Talking about like Missouri and hospitals and stuff. One of the things, this is super tangential, which is also why I didn't send questions advance because I'm very tangential. I don't really think linearly. One of the things that I was kind of confused about in season 2 of Tokyo Vice was, we'll call him Taj. I've heard you call him Taj on other podcasts.
Oh yeah. The other Jake, because it's so weird that. Yeah, I guess I should also say I am an executive producer on Tokyo Vice, the TV series, but more in name only because my power over that series is this one.
For sure. Yeah. I know how that stuff goes for sure. But there's just this scene. I assume you've watched it and like are familiar enough with it. And I'm just curious if you understand what happened here. Where basically, you go to Missouri, you catch the doctor because he has the really nice watch that he would probably not be able to afford. That implies that he's blah, blah, blah. You come back to Japan, you're working on the article. 1010 gives up, kind of messes up, right? And there's this moment where they focus on 1010. You guys have an argument. He goes, then he sits down and walks, and the camera just lightly adjusts and focuses on 1010's watch. And I thought that was going to be this thing. I don't know if you remember this moment, but it totally messed me up. It's like, wait, that was one of the best shots I've ever seen if it's implying that he's dirty. But then I was like, maybe I don't know enough about watches because maybe it's not a nice watch and it's implying that he's clean.
I think what it's implying there is that Tintin is poor.
Okay.
and definitely not, this is like an honest man's watch. I think that's what we're implying there.
Okay. Sick. It was really well done. I was blown away. The second season was by far one of, I would say, top 5 seasons of shows that I've watched. I was very stoked on it.
I'm glad you say this. I know that you've done your homework. So Tokyo Vice, the showrunner, and for people who are not into Hollywood parlance, and for me, I explain this every time because it's a term I never heard until working on this. The person who puts it all together, makes sure it's cohesive, is J.T. Rogers, who I used to call John back in the day. We went to high school together. We were in driver's ed class. We used to go in speech tournaments. He was in the drama group, and I was the debate team of Rockbridge Senior High School. Like, that's it. It's hard to be a debate team when there's just one of you, but that was the deal. So we've known each other for a long time. So from the very beginning, when this got greenlighted, I went to his house in outer New York, and we sat in his little office, which is outside of the main house, and we plotted, basically 2 seasons. So we always kind of knew where we were going. We were always hoping to get 2 seasons and have a conclusion in 2 seasons, because in this world, you never know, will you get a 3rd season, will you get a 4th season? And, as he said, I'll borrow his words, season 1 was setting the table, like an elaborate, like an elaborate party before the main event. And then season 2 is the main event. We've set the scene, we've set the table. You met all the people, and then that's the feast.
Yeah. Dude, it was fantastic to have that and Shogun coming out like week by week over the last 2 months was just an epic way for someone who lives in Austin, Texas to be able to put myself into the land of the falling yen.
Yeah, I'm glad that Tokyo Vice came out before Shogun, because it would have hard to be in the shadow of that.
Mhm.
And the world of like Japanese actors in television is so small, right? That I actually, the other day I was having dinner with Mari Yamamoto, who was one of the associate producers and also in the writer's room for all of Tokyo Vice season 1 and 2. We used to write for the Daily Beast together. She's in Monarch: Legacy of Monsters, she plays Dr. Miura, which is also a great show.
Okay.
Great sci-fi. If you like Godzilla, I mean, it's wonderful. So she's one of the leads in that. And then we were having dinner with Taku, who is in Shogun. He's also in Giri Haji, which is a great police drama made by the BBC. So, we're all there. And Mari and him are in a movie that's being made right now called, I think, Rental Family, with Brandon Fraser, in which he plays Mari's boss and she's the subordinate. And I think in the TV show, Mari is the mother and he is the son. That becomes very complicated, but I was thinking, it all comes together. So there's tangential connections to Shogun. Pachinko, which is another great series. I worked on season 2 of that a little bit as an advisor. That's also nice.
Nice. Did I hear something correctly in a podcast you did like 2 years ago that potentially, if it wasn't going to be Ansel, it was going to be Daniel Radcliffe that was going to play you?
Oh, there was a movie, and if you can look back to it, there was an announcement they were going to make a movie of it with Daniel Radcliffe, Dan to his friends, as me, and I loved Dan. He was great.
Yeah.
His Japanese was good. He was
Really?
really into it, and it fell apart pretty much because the Japanese partner they had picked got cold feet, and I think they got cold feet because they realized, oh my God, we're going to be making a movie about one of the most, powerful gangsters in Japan who used to rule the entertainment industry, and that's going to make us a lot of enemies. Let's get the hell out of here.
Yeah.
Which I warned the producers would probably happen. I'm like, you do not want to partner with this particular Japanese studio. I can give you a lot of reasons why this will eventually fail. And it did. So that all blew up. I did go see Dan in The Lifetime of a Fact, in which he plays a fact checker. It was on Broadway, and he was wonderful in it. Really good. So I watched him. I was like, God damn, he would have been great as Taj.
Yeah, for sure. Ansel's great too, though. Is it true that Tokyo Vice still is not published in Japanese?
There is a Amazon version.
Okay.
There's only a Kindle version. No, I actually was in the, for me, because I'm print media, right? That's what I started at. I'm like 55, right? I started at times as a newspaper journalist when we were still faxing in stories. I had to develop film. It feels like 1,000 years ago. So for me, if it's not printed, it's not quite real. But every time there is a conversation about it at the last minute, people get nervous. And I had a publisher that was gung-ho for it. And then at the last meeting, they were like, well, this part about Goro Taramasa and his relationships to Soka Gakkai, which is a religious group here that's very powerful with the political party, that's upsetting. This, there are too many taboos to touch this thing. So we can't publish it. They're very nice about it. And I was like, okay. And, and one person sort of told me like, Goto is still alive and he still has allies in this mob boss that I pissed off years ago. And we're just not comfortable with that risk. And I was like, okay, that's fine. I guess it'll just exist as an Amazon version.
Yeah. Do you feel like comfortable and safe now? I know, that was up for question for a long time with your family and everything.
I talk about a lot of this in Tokyo Noir, which I'm glad you got a copy of.
Mm-hmm.
Events worked out so that I felt like I didn't really have anything to worry about. I mean, there's this misconception that there is the Yakuza, right?
Mhm.
Like, but it's never the Yakuza. There are 20 groups, each with various factions. I pissed off one faction of 1,000 people. Now that is, you know, at the time, that's really scary. But at the same time, there was another faction that really wanted the leader of the faction that I was having problems with out of the picture so they could take his turf and his territory. And by sort of giving them an opportunity to seize territory and power, I would say we had a sort of uneasy alliance, and that made life much easier.
Mm.
These days, I mean, the Yakuza are what, are a fourth of what they used to be? And, I'm not doing things that piss off people. The character is Sato, right?
Mhm.
So Sato is based on a real person.
Oh, really? Okay.
It's based on two people. He's based on Saigo in The Last Yakuza,
Mhm.
and he's also based
Tsunami.
on someone I went to college with. He's a year older than me. Now, his path into the Yakuza is much different than the path that most people take. But he has been in and out of that business. And, we're still friends. We're still friends. But, my girlfriend was like, don't ever have him over to the house while he's still in the Yakuza. And I'm like, that is fair. I'm never going to have him over to the house while the Yakuza. And I told him that. We had lunch at the Foreign Correspondents Club the other day. And I was like, and he's, just like in the TV series, as I rose up, he rose up. And at times we could sort of talk to each other and share information. And that has been useful and nice. And sometimes, a little uncomfortable, like the scene in Heat between the cop and the bad guy.
Mhm.
But as we were having lunch, he was like, like my boss is about to rise up in the organization. He's going to be, the number 2 or the number 3. And I could set up an interview with you, with him. You would have an exclusive interview. And I was like, I'm not going to take that offer. And he's like, why? And I said, because, because I'm, you know, because I'm out of that world. I keep some ties, but if I interview your boss and anything goes wrong with that interview, then I'm back in the same messes that I've been before.
Mhm.
And as a principal now, like I'm not going to interview anybody who's still in the Yakuza because it's always a headache. And if I am going to talk to them, we're going to keep it very low key because the last thing I want is the cops to like consider me an associate of the Yakuza because then I can't have a bank account, then I can't have a telephone line. Then, life becomes very inconvenient, just like it is for you if you were to use your real name. And he was okay with that. But yeah, at 55, I'm like, I can't roll with the punches. I'm like, if I get in an angry fight or an altercation with these people, like I'm going to be aching for weeks,
Mhm.
so don't want to do that.
Yeah. One of the things from the book specifically, Tokyo Vice, that really hit me and that I've been sitting with a lot because I'm about to have a daughter is this seemingly dichotomy between greatness and goodness. I've
Mhm.
witnessed it in like kind of my own existence. Like my dad's first wife was a professional tennis player. Her name's Billie Jean King, pretty famous. But like she
Wow.
and like
Yeah.
changed the world, right? And my dad and her changed the world, but at the same time, like she cheated on him a lot. There's this greatness and goodness. You have to sacrifice a lot in order to do great things, and you have, you know, I think had a massive impact on human trafficking in Japan. You've had a massive impact on exposing the Yakuza. I think you've done a lot of great things, but there were a lot of decisions you had to make that weren't necessarily good in order to do that. And how do you square those things?
Wow. My daughter just graduated from college, so I was back in Missouri for that too. It was kind of a work trip. I mean, both my kids kid me as being like an absentee father. Like, oh, like your uncle dad. Like you can't tell us what to do because you haven't been around enough. Uh, you know, and I wonder if I would have done things differently. But at the same time, I did my best when I found myself in impossible situations to make sure that at least they were safe. And, in the hopes that maybe my daughter would understand why I have done the things that I've done. on why life worked like this. On the Evaporated, she worked with me as an intern for the summer. And it just so happened that as we were in private detective school, I think I have my diploma up there somewhere behind me. I could see it over there. So we're up in, Hokkaido going to private detective school, learning how to trail people and find missing people. And the former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe gets shot, right?
Oh
I am in
yeah, yeah,
Hokkaido.
yeah.
I am very far away. And so I call up Benny and her friend Himari Siemens, who was like studying journalism at Waseda. And I'm like, Benny, like the Prime Minister has been shot. I'm writing this up for the Daily Beast. I cannot get there. Go to the store, grab my business cards, gather your clothes. I need you on a Shinkansen in 30 minutes. And she's like, now? As in now? I'm like, now. You go to the police station. I will send you the stuff while you're on the train. You've got money. Keep all the receipts. Like, go now. Absolutely now. Drop whatever you're doing. This is a once in a lifetime story. And she went to the police station and, her Japanese is so-so. And the two of them did a very good job. And, I told her, like, on this, since you're working as an intern with me on these things, I'm not your dad. I'm your boss. And I will try and be diplomatic and won't yell at you like I got yelled at, but, I can't baby you either. And at the end of the summer, she said to me, Pop, like, I finally understand why you often seem distracted when you're with us, because I realize as a journalist, you're always on call. You never really get a day off, and you have to respond to changing events all the times. And it is in talking to your colleagues and meeting people and hearing how hard you worked and the things that you've done. I really respect you as a journalist. As a dad, I'm still on the fence, but as a journalist, a person, I'm really impressed. And I was like, that's you hope that, right, that your kids will understand, this is why we did things. Looking back, the one thing I sort of regret is I took this gig with the LA Times, which was supposed to be just writing features, but really turned into like a full-time job, even though the pay wasn't very good. And that made it very hard for me to go home. And that year was kind of like a lost year because I was not back in the States very often.
Mm.
So, in terms of fathering, but the kids are both in college. They both turned out okay.
Yeah.
The other thing is, it's, how do you say this? If you ask a dishonest person an honest question, you'll just get a dishonest answer. So part of being a journalist and, realizing, okay, I'm working for a greater good here is sometimes you have to be really pushy and really tough and confrontational. And you can't be a nice guy to everybody. And there will people that hate you. I mean, the people that hate you because you do your job, there are people who hate you because you're successful doing your job. But that just comes with it. As Sekiguchi once told me, and this is the line shows up in Tokyo Vice, a man without enemies isn't much of a man. If you make a stand, if you do what is right, if you make people face uncomfortable truths, you will make enemies.
Mhm.
That's not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah. It does feel like that was your superpower, and it comes through in both movie and book. And I wonder that you were able to do that as a gaijin because, you didn't have necessarily the same structural taboos and norms internally, but you just like you just get yourself in there and you just do it. Like you find a way to get the scoop. Like it's so funny because like neither the book or the movie are about writing really, even though it's about writing. Like they're about your capacity to get into the room and to get the answers.
Well, so Tokyo Noir is a lot about due diligence investigations, right? Which is very similar to being a reporter in the sense that you're looking at really crappy companies, right? And you're trying to see if this company, in my case, I was working for an investment bank. Investment banks is either bought stock in this company or is about to buy stock in this company. And they want to know, is it legitimate? Is it a Yakuza front company? Are they actually, paying money off to organized crime in the background? Is there anything that is so bad about this company that it's a compliance risk? And usually by the time it gets down to me, there's a pretty good idea that's there. But in order to get those answers, I can't go knock on the door and be like, excuse me, are you shaking hands with the Yakuza in the background? Or like, are you lying to your customers? Are your financial records all screwed up? And so, yeah, that ability to figure out how do I get to the truth by any means possible whether that is pretexting them, whether that is showing up as a pizza delivery guy and looking into the office and seeing like, okay, you know, like there's a bunch of guys here in this office with missing fingers. This is probably not the firm that it's supposed to be. That's necessary. But, you know, I've always liked that part of the job the most. Writing is hard.
Yeah, writing sucks. Yeah.
You sit down there with that blank page, or you're like, and now, I mean, this isn't a complaint, but you know, when I wrote for the Yomiuri Shimbun, right, it's very patternized. Who did what, when, where, why. In the old days when newspapers had limited space, right, before there was the internet, which technically you could write, it doesn't matter how long it is, you can write as much as you want. You have to fit everything into this kind of reverse pyramid so that if there's not enough space on the page, the editor can just chop from the bottom, especially right before deadlines. And that's a style of writing that doesn't require you to be like mesmerizing or draw the reader in. But now you have to write things like you have the attention deficit economy or the attention economy. There's many ways to be it. So you've got to hook someone within the first page on their first scroll on their iPhone. And that requires more craft, you know, and more depth. And like, okay, how do you get someone interested in this story and, you know, communicate a little bit about what it's about because you don't know if they'll ever finish it, which makes the writing part much harder.
Mm. Was it challenging for you to write? Because it feels like such a different style. The last Yakuza, like one, also big ups for doing that. Like I really respect the fact that you did because that was your promise to him was to write the book, and I was like, fuck yeah, let's go, it's out. But it was such a different style, you know, because you're not in it. And like so
Oh,
much of the narrative, nonfiction of Tokyo Vice and why it's so good is because you're in it, you know?
well, I mean, so really, you know, this book, Tokyo, you know, The Last Yakuza has this really long history. So I wrote it. I did a legal revision and like, oh, and I did like, oh, like, holy shit. Like Japan, like completely destroyed the statute of limitations on murder and they made it retroactive. And I'm like,
Oh
okay,
shit.
now I'm going to have to throw out like, you know, 100 pages here because people talked to me
Yeah.
on the record about, you know, whacking someone, thinking that 20 years had gone by, right? You can't touch me, you know? And I'm like, oh, now they can really touch you. So that was a headache. Then I had an editor's shift midway through, and there was like one person who wanted me like, can you write this like Tokyo Vice where it's first person narrative and you know you're sort of Virgil in this Dante's Inferno? And I was like, no. Like the point of this book is to write it in the third person because it's not my story.
Mm-hmm.
It's not my story. I can't write it in the first person, you know. And you know, and as a writer, I wanted to show I can write a book in the third person that I'm not in it, and it can still make a good narrative. So it was much harder to write, and it took a lot of time because you have to talk to these people and ask them like, what were you thinking at that time? And I realized, you know, maybe this isn't a profound realization, is that people do things, and sometimes they have no idea why they're doing it at the time. They don't, you know, they're just going with the flow. They're just reacting to the situation. There's no great thoughts going on in their head. They just do it. You know, sometimes not even intentionally. And sometimes people don't even know their own motives.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that's also fascinating too. It's like, okay, you want to get inside someone's head so you can sort of write kind of in an omniscient fashion, but sometimes you don't know. So you can only describe what the events were. And I'm so glad that you like that book. And I'm always pleased when people tell me, like, I liked The Last Yakuza more than Tokyo Vice. I'm like, yay. So, you know, we do this a little bit in Evaporated. And also, I sold my soul for Bitcoin. So I'll try and get you a copy of that way in advance.
Oh, amazing.
Is you take one story and you make that sort of the narrative thread, which around you weave other stories. So there's a connecting thread, but you go on these kind of tangents and then you come back to where you are. So, you know, in The Last Yakuza, you meet Saigo's boss, the coach. And by the way, the coach is totally the model for Ishida in season 1 and season 2. Harakai guy.
Yeah, that's
I
what
mean,
I felt like. Yeah.
absolutely. If you saw, and I posted on Instagram, if you saw pictures of Sugata-san and Kanazawa-san side by side, they even look alike down to the haircut.
Sick. Which that guy has so much style. He has so
Yeah.
much style, bro. He's dripping in
Yeah.
it.
I
Yeah.
mean, Yakuza talk about like, why did you join the Yakuza? And they say this like, nantoka kumicho ni horimashita. And that literally means like I fell in love with the kumicho. And Kanazawa-san was so impressive that I sort of had that sort of male, like, not a romance, but it's like, oh, like you're so cool.
For sure, dude. 100%. Yeah. Yeah.
Like I wish I had an ounce of your coolness. So what was so that's the last Yakuza thing. That was like, okay, let's do something totally different. Let's do a third person narrative. Let's make it work. Now I sold myself for Bitcoins, which isn't out yet, so probably shouldn't be talking about it, but I will. One of the things that, made that interesting is, so I'm working with this French publisher, Marshally, and everything I've written since Tokyo Vice has been published in French first because the French really love Japan. They really like true crime. And and Marshally, which are the publishers, are basically like 3 or 4 guys. I mean, it started as a group of 4 people. Now they're down to 3. And they're all college friends. They're really small. And I'm friends with them all. It's like my other family, my French family. So on that book, right, I'd done a book in third person. I'm like, okay, I'm going to do my next book in third person. Pardon me. And not about, not Bitcoin specifically, but about the collapse of Mt. Gox, which was once the world's largest Bitcoin exchange in Tokyo. And, Mark Karplus was accused of basically looting his own Bitcoin exchange.
Mm-hmm.
And, and I'd worked on that story for years. And even as I was writing it, I was like, is Karplus guilty or is he not guilty? Did he really get hacked or did someone else hack him? And even as I'm writing this, I didn't know, like a choose your own adventure.
Thank you guys so much for your time and attention. I hope you enjoyed this small taste of the podcast. This is now going into the paid portion. And I hope that you liked what you got and you feel inclined to head to skmp.supercast.com or click the link that's in the description. You can listen to this full episode and many others. And I just want to leave you with an idea that nothing is free. In every single transaction, there is a buyer and a seller. And if you're not paying for something, I would be careful because you might just be that which is being sold.